to our webinar today. Going to be discussing Wetland Policy and Water Act compliance. But I think today I'm excited to introduce our friends from the Alberta government. I think it's a great topic, the Water Act and Wetland Policy. Municipalities don't have a lot of involvement in it, but we do have a lot of land. It does affect a lot of landowners within municipalities. Again, we have some great presenters here today. And we're going to record the sessions for those that expressed interest but weren't able to attend. Beyond that, Marlon, are you going to introduce the members today? I kind of did a little bit, but if you're probably well more versed in who everybody is than I am, for sure.
Yeah, I'll certainly do that. It's part of this first little intro.
Perfect.
Slideshow.
Perfect. Then, Marlon, I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Todd. And firstly, I want to thank Todd and Mark and the County of Newell for inviting us here today. We like opportunities to help, I guess, inform people of what we look for, what legal requirements are for activities on the land, on the landscape. And in this session, I think we've pretty much focused on management of water. Seem to fit with the theme of land productivity and making as many acres available to the landowner as possible for production. So that's what we focused on here today. I think I would like to say that we will certainly entertain questions during each presentation, but if we're getting into long discussions, I think we'll defer them to the end of everybody's presentation. We have a number of people presenting here today, so if we can just be mindful of that, I think that would be great. And let's see if we can get going on this. So we have, again, thanks for the County of Newell for inviting us today. For Environment and Parks, we're responsible for the management of water in Alberta. The Water Act is the authority that we work under. And of course, the regulations and codes and directives and stuff like that. We look after diversions and impoundments of water, which require a license. We also do a lot of drainage and relocation of water activities, which requires an approval. We have an online approval application system, so no longer will you be filling out forms and emailing them or anything like that. You can do it right from home on your computer. And we have a piece, a fairly significant piece on wetlands, and if projects have the potential to impact wetlands, they have to meet wetland policy. We'll go into that a little bit later on in the show. So this is who's presenting. We have a little piece on licenses from Mitch Seward. He looks after all of our surface water licenses and license transfers. I'm going to follow that with a drainage piece for approvals. Then we have Julian Marchand. He's our wetland specialist, and he will be doing a show on wetland policy and wetland requirements. And we have Jason Caford. He's going to be doing a presentation on the online application system, and he'll walk you through that. And then finally, we're going to end the show with Logan, who's one of the compliance assurance leads on our compliance group out of Lethbridge here. And all of us here are from Lethbridge, other than Julian. He works out of Calgary. There will be some contact numbers at the end. So if you do have specific questions about projects on your landscape, you can touch base with us directly. And I believe that's the end of my little introductory piece. So I'm going to stop sharing. We'll turn it over to Mitch, and then I'll come back and do the drainage piece.
Thank you, Marlon. Hello, everybody. As Marlon maybe have said, I'm going to do a little piece on the Water Act licensing. It's just a nice little 2-slide presentation, as licenses typically require more in-depth discussion. So usually I like to have people contact me to discuss what they want to do, and then we could go from there. So, is everybody able to see my screen? Somebody give me a thumbs up.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
betcha.
you're good.
Good to go.
Okay. So the South Saskatchewan River Basin is actually closed to new surface water license applications. So that kind of restricts what people can do. So if you don't have anything existing, then your hands are pretty much tied. Irrigation projects within the irrigation district don't require a license from Alberta Environment and Parks, but they are handled by the district and require an agreement. And sometimes that's a conveyance agreement or something like that. But AEP doesn't usually get into that because the Eastern Irrigation District is in charge of managing their water. Licenses that are privately held are through the works of the EID. So sometimes in certain situations, the EID was only able to issue conveyance agreements for irrigation projects, and if they required them for stock watering or any other purpose, then what we did is we did it through the works of the EID. So the EID was responsible for delivering the water, and AEP was in charge of managing that license, and then that falls on the license holder to report to AEP on what the water is using, how much water they're using. So if we talk about license expansions and transfers, so privately held licenses have options to expand irrigation acres through water conservation. So this kind of looks like if they are going from something like wheel lines to a pivot, then obviously the project's changing a little bit. If the license is through the works of the EID but is privately held, then they can contact the department or contact myself, even better, and we will provide them with options. Sometimes this requires a license transfer, depending on the project, on how much new acres are being irrigated or what the point of use and point of diversion looks like. And other times the license can simply be amended. And like I said at the beginning of this, it's best off just to contact me if you're looking at any information or what you want to do, because every situation is a little different and I can help point you in the right direction. And that is actually all for me.
Well, that was very easy, and I see Marlon has screen shared again, so I assume Marlon is coming up next.
As soon as he finds the unmute button.
There we go. It's covered by my screen sharing box. There we go. So again, here's a little picture of some water on the landscape. Perhaps this landowner might be interested in a water drainage project. And so let's get into water drainage. Just before I do, I guess I will be upfront, and there may be some background noise. We are fostering a rescued dog at the moment, and she's in a crate. She doesn't really like it. So you may hear some background noise from time to time, but we'll try to keep that down to a minimum. All right, moving forward, drainage. So the Water Act defines activity for us. I've just listed a couple of them here. You can read them, but basically anything that has the potential to impact where water is, or the location of water, the flow, rate of flow of water, is deemed an activity under the Water Act. And all activities require an approval under the Water Act, unless they are exempted in the Water Ministerial Regulations. But there are no approval exemptions in the regulation for drainage projects. So just to make this one really short, all drainage projects require an approval. And if you, again, as Mitch offered, if you have any discussions or questions or conversations, you want to call me about something you're thinking about doing on the landscape, my number's at the end. Give me a shout. We can talk about your project. So I thought I would include some basic stuff just to help with the application processing timelines. There are certain things we look for in a drainage approval application package. Obviously, the name and the contact information of the applicant, the landowner name and contact information. Sometimes they're not the same. Sometimes we get proposals from renters of the land. The legal land location, most definitely. We're also looking for some plan drawings. They don't have to be professionally done. They can be, but they don't have to be. We want a detailed description of the project, and we will require signed written consent from potentially affected stakeholders or parties or landowners or counties or irrigation districts and such. So this is the minimum of what would be expected in a drainage approval application package. A little bit more detail. What we're looking for in the plan drawings, we want to see a fairly close-up bird's eye view if possible. Again, it can be hand-drawn, it can be satellite imagery, whatever you have available to you. We want to see the quarter section boundary lines. We want to see the quarter section legal land location identified on the drawing. We want to see the location on the landscape of all the proposed drainage infrastructure. If it's surface swales, ditching, trenching, if it's subsurface tile, we just want to see the layout. We want to see the point of, sorry, jumped ahead of myself a bit. We want to see some cross-section profile drawings of your surface features, showing us the length, width, slopes, side slopes, stuff like that. We want to see on the drawing the location of the outflow, the discharge point, and if there's any flow control devices. Sometimes, in my experience, counties, MDs, irrigation districts, as a condition of them providing consent, will require a gate or a valve or some kind of flow control device at the location of the discharge point. Also want to see, I don't know if oh yeah, it's there in the middle. So we want to see that in the closer up view of the quarter section. We also would like to see, where does the water go once it leaves your quarter section, once it leaves your parcel of land? If it's flowing down a county ditch, if it's flowing through a natural drainage course, we want to see where the water goes until it enters an adequate outlet. So an adequate outlet is basically where the water that has been relocated is not likely to impact anybody else, so other private landowners or counties, MDs, stuff like that. If you're discharging water off of your parcel of land into the county ditch, that's probably not the adequate outlet. The water will potentially flow down that ditch either into a natural water body or water course, or perhaps into an irrigation district return system or something like that. And that's where we get to the adequate outlet. So we want to see where that water flows, just so that we can verify who may be potentially affected and make sure those potentially affected parties have the opportunity to, I guess, have their concerns addressed. Moving forward, we'd like to see a detailed written description of the project. You'll see when we get into the online application system, you have room available to write stuff down, type stuff in, but it doesn't have to be in that format. If you want to type it up on a separate piece of paper or write it up, doesn't matter, and add it as an attachment to your application package, that's fine. We'd like to see how many acres are being drained, a description of your project. So what are you planning to do? You want surface features, subsurface features, give us some lengths and depths, the length and the size and the type of your tile, 4-inch, 6-inch or larger. If you have an outlet flow control device, tell us what that is. Sometimes if you are having a tile drainage system professionally designed for you, they will actually provide you with the maximum potential discharge rate. If you know that, please provide it. It'll help the people that who may be required to provide consent for your project. It'll help them make that decision. I thought I would show a couple of examples of some plan drawings. And we'll scroll through these fairly quickly. This is just a simple layout of some drainage tile. They've shown us where the outlet is, going through an MDF Tabor culvert into the BRID drain right here. Got some legal land locations identified. This is similar fashion, showing us the layout of their tile system. And then in this one, there's also a surface ditch here. We've got a system outlet, and of course the BRID drain, another empty culvert here, and then back into the BRID drain. So for example, on this one, obviously the applicant is here. We would want consent from the BRID plus the MD of Tabor in this case, because the water would be flowing through or across the road right of way. Here's another example that was professionally done. It's got 4-inch main. You can't see the colors here, but we got 4-inch main. We got a 4-inch tile, 6-inch, and there's actually an 8-inch here. I think, yeah, this one does have the maximum flow rate at the point of outlet right here, so that's always nice to have. Here's another one that was professionally done. Again, just for an example, here's the discharge route to the irrigation district system. Here's a less fancy one, but it's just a circle of an area where they were doing some contouring to allow water to flow into this MD of Tabor road allowance, and then the BRID infrastructure here. A little bit of a description. About 5 acres they were looking at in this case. Here's one that's a little bit higher elevation, bird's eye view, kind of shows where the water will actually flow. And that's very helpful. Also, it has a nice little how many acres are being drained and stuff like that. So I think if I remember, that's the last one. Yeah. So that's kind of what we look for in a drainage approval application package. And again, if anyone wants to call me directly to talk about their own project, more than happy to do that. But otherwise, that's it for my drainage piece. I'm not muted. So I think we're moving on to Julian is next.
That is correct. Hold on just 1 second. Can everybody see the presentation?
Yes.
Perfect. Hi, I'm Julian Marchand. I was gonna share my camera, but now I've already started the presentation, so I'll do it at the end so you can see my face and who I am. I am the wetland specialist for Southern Alberta. We just recently hired somebody in Red Deer, so now I'm only responsible for the Calgary district south. So I'm responsible for the entire southern portion of the South District. And I'll talk about the wetland policy and then some of the restoration options that are available. So the wetland policy, as previously stated, the Water Act is the enforcement legislation that we utilize, and activities within a water body require an authorization defined as an activity. So this slide outlines that anything that occurs within a water body is basically an activity unless it's an exempted activity under the Water Act. But basically it's a wide range of things, and really what you need to focus on is that if it alters, may alter, or become capable of altering the flow or level of water by any means including drainage, changes, may change, or become capable of changing the location of water or the direction of flow, cause or may cause, or capable of causing the siltation of water, may cause, or may become capable of causing an effect to the aquatic environment. So again, that's very broad, but it touches everything associated with any aquatic environment. So the definition of a water body is any location where water flows or is present, whether or not the flow is or presence of water is continuous, intermittent, or occurring only during a flood, and includes but not limited to wetlands or aquifers. So I like to think about it that all thumbs are fingers, but not all fingers are thumbs. So all wetlands are water bodies, but not all water bodies are wetlands. So in 2018, the Alberta Water Council recommended for a new provincial wetland policy, and it was a phased approach for implementation to allow training of both internal and external users of the models and tools, and to continue outreach and education of the policy. So we just looked at, in 2013, we got our new provincial wetland policy, and then full implementation of that happened in 2016. So the goal of the policy is to conserve, restore, protect, and manage Alberta's wetlands to sustain the benefits they provide to the environment, society, and the economy. Based on this goal, the policy outcomes are that the wetlands of highest value are protected for the long-term benefit of all Albertans. Wetlands and their benefits are conserved and restored in areas where loss have been high. Wetlands are managed by avoiding and minimizing negative impacts, and where necessary, replacing lost wetland value, and wetland management considers a regional context. So basically, the areas where there's been more loss, we consider them the ones that are remaining more valuable. So as you can see here, these are basically the 4 points of the wetland conservation, of the wetland outcomes, right? So there's the highest value wetlands are protected, the wetlands and their benefits are conserved and restored in areas where losses have been high. Wetlands are managed by avoiding and minimizing impacts, and where necessary, replacing lost wetland value. And it's a regional context, which just means that if you lose them in your area, we want to put them back in your area. We maintain them where they are lost. So the Wetland Policy Mitigation Hierarchy. So this is one of the most important points of the policy, is that the preferred response is to avoid impacts to wetlands. So the department's position is that we want to eliminate the amount of impacts that occur to wetlands on the landscape, and if we can avoid those and plan to not impact wetlands, then that's the best outcome. The second best is to minimize those impacts, so reduce them as much as possible on the landscape so we don't see as many impacts. And then the last option is to replace them, and that's only in circumstances where avoidance and minimization are not possible. So wetlands on property, like we just learned a little bit about the policy and a little bit about the legislation. Like, what does this actually mean? Well, first, like, what is a wetland? So wetlands are land saturated with water long enough to promote wetland or aquatic processes as indicated by poorly drained soils, water tolerant vegetation, and various kinds of biological activity that are adapted to the wet environment. Basically, this is the definition that outlines the methodology in the Wetland Identification and Delineation Directive that determines how the boundary of the wetland is identified. And that's by the presence of these water tolerant vegetation, biological activity, and poorly drained soils. So another thing about wetlands in the landscape is that they're a lot more prominent than you think. So typically people consider wetlands to be semi-permanent or permanent water bodies that have water throughout the year. However, there are seasonal and temporary wetlands that probably only hold water during the early portions of the spring, or after rain, it's an area that is wet for a prolonged period. So it only really has to have standing water for more than 2 weeks to be considered a wetland, which is a lot of areas. That timeline allows for the generation of aquatic conditions and different plant species that can support early season habitats. So they are a lot more prominent on the landscape than I think most people consider them to be. So what does that mean? Well, the first thing that needs to be done is that we need to identify the wetlands. And so typically this is done by utilizing the Wetland Identification and Delineation Directive, and is the document that outlines the methodologies for how to identify and delineate wetlands in Alberta. Typically, wetland identification and delineation requires both a desktop and field delineation. When the identification and delineation is performed, you have to be an authenticating wetland professional in order to do it. That means that you have to be a PBio, a PAG, a professional agrologist, a professional biologist, a professional engineer, a professional surveyor. You have to have the practice area so that your professional body would say that you are proficient in identifying and delineating wetlands. So I spoke about how there's a desktop and a field-based. So the desktop, you take historical aerial imageries. There's a bunch of images that have been taken, so photo interpretation images that have been taken since 1950 until current day. You utilize that information with relevant precipitation information to determine, what the presence of water is likely to be on the landscape at the time the image was taken, and then you can supplement that with topographic information to locate the depressions to kind of understand, what the image is actually showing you, that it's showing you saturated land and not some other type of feature that might conflict with the image itself. The visual interpretation and identification of the wetland area is basically what is done through the desktop delineation. This is just a preliminary step that requires a field authorization to supplement it to ensure that you're adequately identifying the areas. Because sometimes wet areas look dry and dry areas look wet. So the field delineation, like we said in the definition, water altered soil, water tolerant vegetation. So the field delineation, it determines the ecological boundary of the wetland and upland using wetland field indicators. So what this really means is it finds the line where water no longer influences the development of water altered soil or water loving vegetation, or water tolerant vegetation, I think is a better way to put it. And those differentiating features, when you no longer have the wetland field indicators of vegetation or of soil, then you do not have a wetland anymore. This gets conflated by the fact that lots of these areas can be farmed and lots of the areas are farmed, and so the vegetation is likely not to be seen. And so this is another reason why it's really important to get a qualified professional to actually look to make sure that these areas are not wetland before you alter them in any capacity, because altering them just because you don't see vegetation, all you see is canola, that could be the result of altering the site itself and doesn't mean that it's not a wetland. So it's important to have a professional come and look to ensure that all of the indicators are not there and that the area would not be classified as a wetland. So how do you use this information? Well, another reason for why there's a difference between the desktop delineation and the field delineation is because with certain activities, so the working within the water body as defined under the legislation, a desktop delineation can be deemed acceptable. The list of these activities is in Table 1. So actually, I'll just show you. Is in Table 1 of the Wetland Assessment Impact Form. So I'm not going to go through them all, but these are low impact activities or activities that require 100% reclamation. So that means that the magnitude of impact on the wetlands is already minimized. So having a desktop assessment is deemed satisfactory. Also, these activities, for the most part, do not require replacement because they are going to be reclaiming them back on the landscape. So that's not the case for all of these, but for the ones where reclamation is required, then replacement is also not required. So this assessment for the desktop, based on your activity type, if you can utilize the desktop assessment based on what type of activity you're doing, then you can use that to get your Water Act approval or to support your Code of Practice notification, whichever authorization you're going to be utilizing under the Water Act. If you can't use a desktop delineation, it's not deemed acceptable due to the type of work that you're doing, then a wetland impact assessment report is required. So the form is for desktop, it's the quick one, and a report is the detailed one, and it is for permanent impacts on the landscape. And that one will require a full field delineation associated with it. So The Wetland Assessment and Impact Report is a detailed assessment that outlines the avoidance requirement. As we stipulated before, avoidance is the most important aspect of the mitigation hierarchy. We want to know how avoidance was considered in the application process. This report needs to be used in conjunction with the Alberta Wetland Mitigation Directive. The Alberta Wetland Mitigation Directive outlines the avoidance, minimization, and replacement requirements for each project and associated value of the wetland. So it compares the replacement requirements related to the value of the wetlands impacted. The current policy isn't an area-based policy like the old ones were, so it wasn't just a 3-to-1 replacement. This one values wetlands based on their function to the environment and humans and society more broadly, and how that will be incorporated into the loss of that wetland. So, like I just said, the function over area. And it's known that wetlands provide numerous important ecosystem services in the form of ecological function and the benefits that come from those functions. Specific ecological functions such as water storage, water filtration, groundwater recharge, nutrient cycling, and carbon storage. Wetlands provide unique areas for plants and animals as aquatic terrestrial interfaces. Undoubtedly, these wetland functions provide many benefits to society in the form of flood protection and mitigation, water quality improvement and safe drinking water, and healthy aquatic ecosystems, habitat for a variety of species, including sensitive or rare species and plants, as well as numerous opportunities for recreation and aesthetic appreciation. The wetland policy focuses on wetland function, but does not directly evaluate benefits to society. So it looks at all of these individual functions as a value for use. So the rapid tool, this is how we get the value for the wetlands. So you get biodiversity, water quality improvement, flood reduction, human health, and then abundance. Abundance is basically the factor at which they've been removed on the landscape in a particular area. If more have been removed, the abundance factor is higher. If less have been removed, the abundance factor is lower. All of those inputs get calculated, and then you get a value of a wetland. So A being the highest, B being moderate, C being moderately low, and D being the lowest value wetlands. So back to the point of the policy, we always want to avoid, and avoidance requires in the wetland assessment and impact report that you explain how avoidance was considered, not how it was unavoidable to impact. This is a minor point that really makes a big difference in your application. So we don't want to say, oh, I just couldn't avoid it because whatever reason. You want to say, I looked at other options and those options couldn't be done because of X, Y, and Z. It just really shows that you considered avoiding in other locations prior to coming up with your final determination. Minimization, it's the exact same idea. Just show how you tried to avoid the impacts, and this is then when those were not possible for the reasons that you provided, then you limited the impacts to the wetland area. And then finally, replacement. Replacement can be done in a few different ways, which we're just going to talk about, but it is the last preferred method. So if you have to go the replacement route, there's a few ways you can do it. So you can purchase credits, you can make payments to the in lieu fee program, or you can undertake permittee responsible. The credit system isn't in place yet. There's just no mechanism to track the banking system, and we haven't determined how we're going to evaluate those wetlands yet. So you can make a payment to the in lieu fee program, which is the wetland replacement program, which we'll talk about at the end of this, or you can undertake permittee responsible replacement, which is basically you're just going to replace the wetland area lost somewhere else. So this is how the replacement matrix works. So you have the value of the lost wetlands on the y-axis and the value of the replacement wetland on the x-axis. So when you have the wetland loss, let's say you got an A value wetland, and then the replacement value will always be considered at a D because it is very challenging to put back anything else, and we wouldn't really know if you were actually successful in putting back anything else for a long, long time because the wetlands would have to fully establish. So you're looking at a likelihood of 10 years before that happens. So we assume everything to be a value D wetland for the replacement. So, that'd be if you impacted 1 hectare, you'd be responsible for putting back 8 hectares. For the purposes of this example, we're going to talk about replacement of a value for a C value wetland, so at a 2-to-1. So if you impacted 1 hectare of wetland, you'd have to put back 2 hectares of wetland or be responsible for replacement of 2 hectares of wetland. So how the value is determined if you're going to pay the in lieu fee is that there are relative wetland value assessment unit locations. So based on this map, you just see what area you're in. And Newell is in value area 13. So each hectare of wetland is $17,700. So if you impacted 1 hectare, it would cost you $17,700. So if you take that and you have a 10 hectare impact at a C value wetland, that's a 2-to-1 replacement ratio. So for a 10 hectare disturbance, $17,000. So 10 times 2 to get 20 total hectares of replacement required. 20 hectares times 17,000 is $354,000. So it can add up really fast, but it costs a lot of money for us to retain lands and to put these wetlands back on the landscape. So that cost was actually calculated in 2013. So the costs have gone up, but our replacement ratios haven't. So wetland replacement program. So this is just a brief introduction to this. If the county of Newell would like more information on this to become a partner, we have like a formal presentation that we give on how to become a partner with the wetland replacement program. But here's a quick touch on it. Wetland replacement program, we are trying to partner with stakeholders to complete wetland restoration and wetland construction. This is the first phase of the wetland replacement program development. It's about creating partnerships. We need to work with municipalities because they have a better understanding of what is available on their land for restoration activities or construction activities. They have more contacts with landowners and stakeholder groups within their county than the department ever will. And so we are reaching out for a collaborative approach to creating wetlands on the landscape. So restoration, this is kind of similar to the ditching conversation, just on the other end. So if there are wetlands on your landscape that were drained historically, we would just put a ditch plug or some sort of a structure, a no maintenance structure that allows for the wetlands to reestablish their basin to its pre-disturbance condition. And then construction, it's creating a wetland on a site that was historically non-wetland. So we can establish the gain of wetland area and function, which we would do for both restoration and construction. But with construction, that area was typically either an upland site or it was some sort of a commercial site that has been now renaturalized to a wetland system. With this, if you have an existing wetland on your landscape and you wanted to make it bigger, it would be considered construction to expand that existing wetland to create additional wetland habitat. So we've identified priority areas. They're characterized by Watershed Unit. Their considerations are to the municipal boundaries, and they're determined by wetland loss. So similar to what we talked about historical loss. And if you look right now, so the red areas identify the high priority, and then the kind of yellowish area is the medium priority. So on the large watershed scale, Newell falls within half high priority, half medium priority. And on the detailed priority map scale, then we get Newell as a medium priority and a low priority, but it just means that there are funds available for the county to utilize if they wanted to for wetland restoration within their municipality. So in summary, the wetland policy, we want to either through the creation of ecological habitat or the maintenance of it, the goal is just to maintain the watershed for Albertans and to enjoy now, but also in the future. Improve water quality, create more consistent water quantity, and reduce the watershed flooding and impacts as a result of drainage and alterations. And here's some useful links. So if you have any questions about the wetland policy, you can inquire to aep.wetlands. Then if you have questions about the wetland replacement program, you can go to aep.wetlandsreplacement.gov.ab.ca. So yeah, and then there's also the wetland policy implementation site, which provides links to all of the directives and reports that we talked about today. That's it.
All right, I guess I'm next to talk about Dirac. So let me just share my screen here. Can folks see my screen okay?
Yep, you're good.
Perfect. So yeah, I'm Jason Kayford. I'm Water Administration Engineer in the Lethbridge office. So Marlon kind of already said I'm going to be talking about the Digital Regulatory Assurance System, or Dirac. So kind of the online system that we use for almost all applications under the Water Act, and will be used for everything under the Water Act here soon. So Digital Regulatory Assurance System, what is it? I'm going to call it Dirac from now on. So it's an online system that eventually houses all of the applications, regulatory applications that we'll be making under Alberta Environment and Parks. So right now we're starting with Water Act, and we'll be moving to Environmental Protection and Enhancement Act, and Public Lands Act, and I'm sure the list will go on. Currently, we're live for approvals and licenses under the Water Act, and transfers of water allocations and temporary diversion licenses should be going live here in spring of this year. I believe April is the timeline, but yeah. So where is it? So I refer to this link about 4 times through this presentation, I think, but this link takes you to a landing page that has all the information related to Dirac, and the link to open Dirac directly. So things on that landing page you can see. So there's the current project status. So it'll show what's currently live within the system, and a bit of a landscape for where things are going to be going. It has some information on Indigenous consultations. Generally not something that affects drainage applications, but in the switch to the new system, Indigenous consultations are done by applicants. So some information on how to do that. Some information on creating accounts and authorizing others to submit on your behalf. So yeah, all of these are submitting an application is subject to an account, and how to manage permissions within that account. And there's also some opportunities for training. So there's some training links there. There's some videos showing some walkthroughs. So a lot of good information on that landing page. So I talked about My Alberta Digital ID. So we have 2 kinds of My Alberta Digital ID. So there's MADI, which is just individuals, and MADI B, which is My Alberta Digital ID for businesses. So people, if you're submitting an application just as yourself as a business, you'd use the original MADI. And if you're submitting under a business, say your farm name or some other registered corporation, you'd use My Alberta Digital ID for business. And when you're doing that, when you're making, if you don't already have your MADI B account, it is important to note that you should be using using whatever your official name is under your registered company. So if there's any discrepancies between your MADI account and what your registered business name is, then we do have to send them back to make sure that we are issuing to the exact legal company when we're doing approvals or licenses. And there's some support stuff. I have it again on the last page, but there's an email address for account support as well as a phone number. So now I'm kind of just going to go through a short walkthrough. I chose drainage because I think that's the prime, and I'll talk a little bit about wetlands, but I think most applications that we do get tend to deal with drainage. So Again, you'll go to that landing page, and at the top it'll show this digital regulatory assurance system. And then if you scroll down the page, there'll be a button that says go to DRAS. And this is the main DRAS page. So you've got some information to learn about the application process, a button that talks about submitting a request for authorization, and my dashboard. And I'll kind of go into some of the stuff on this page and then a little bit more detail after. But the first thing you need to do is get logged into the system, and the login is in the upper right side. And then it'll redirect you to another page, and you'll get prompted to either sign in using your My Alberta Digital ID or your My Alberta Digital ID for Business. Whichever one you click in, you'll go to a sign-in screen, and you just put in your username and password. DRAS help. So there are a couple of help features within DRAS if you're stuck and don't know what to do. So there's first, I'll go through the knowledge FAQ, and the second I'll go through get help. So the knowledge FAQ. So this just contains a little bit of information about the application process, the approval process, and some of the information that we have there. So there's when we get into the system, you'll see that there's some mapping tool stuff. So you can see some information on how to use the mapping tool. If you want, you can go into here and search for some of the things. So if you wanted to search for, say, a drainage application, it'll take you to an article that talks about information required in a drainage application. So things like that are available there. And then there's the other side. So there was the get help button, and then there's it shows some ways to connect with us. So if you go into the how can we help you section, that's kind of where you would submit any questions you might have about the system, and then it'll go to a centralized email. You'll get a contact back. And then connect with us takes you to a page where you can get some contact information directly to AEP offices. Fortunately, in this presentation's the contact for a lot of us already, so I'd say you probably already have the contact that you're looking for that you would find in there. So submitting an application. So there's this big submit a request for authorization button. You click that, and then you'll get taken to another page here. Because I'm looking at submitting an application for an approval for drainage, I would click the Water Act Approvals button and then click Water Approval Drainage Application. If you were to submit something else, these are all the other types of approvals that we have. So we've already talked about wetland disturbances. If you click that, you'd go to the wetland disturbance page instead. So the drainage application page, a lot of this stuff at the top is going to be pre-filled. So your contact name will be there, your email should be there, your phone number should be there. It's all pulled from your Mati account. Same with your mailing address. There's a section here, and I'll apologize for the size. If I made it a lot bigger, it'd be 100 slides, but it's a lot easier to read with the document, which I believe we'll be providing to people. There's a section here where you can enter additional recipients or emails. So if you want somebody else, if you want somebody else to be able to see some of the correspondence coming from DRAS and get notifications of things that are happening, you'd enter that there. So instead of just one person getting emails, more than one person can get emails. There's this section here. It says, are you submitting application on behalf of another organization or individual? So basically that refers to having somebody else representing you in the DRAS system who would submit your applications for you. So if you're submitting an application for somebody else, you'd click yes, but generally if you're doing it yourself, you'd say no. And then this part refers to authorization being an individual or company. So if you're an individual, be an individual. If you're a company, you select company, and it should autofill your company here. And then you can put a project title. It's whatever you want for yourself. It's entirely for your reasons, and for us, we're able to quickly see what that project title is when we're looking at it on our side as well. So activity description. This is that area that Marlon was talking about, and this is one of the only sections in the application form where you can write anything you want. So be as detailed as you can or want there. The more detail you have, the easier it is for us, and less questions we're going to be having as well. Proposed activity start date. Easy as it says, it's the day you plan on starting your activity. Proposed activity end date, when the construction will be done, anticipated end of use date. Typically, we're not looking too much at that when it comes to a drainage application. Generally, when we're looking at drainage applications, we're talking about 25-year approvals, so it kind of covers that construction portion and as well as the operation portion as well. So the next part in the system is submitting some map features for us. So this is probably the part that hangs the most people up. So I'm going to go through it here pretty good. So if you want to, when you open it up, it's going to have a general map of Alberta or somewhere around the area that you are, and you can either click in this map navigation section. And in there, you can type in your quarter section, or you can just zoom in, or you can just use your mouse and mouse wheel to zoom into the area that you know. And then you're gonna want to click add a feature. So basically, we just want to indicate the area that we're looking to drain, because this is what generates all of our the quarter sections and those kinds of things. So you'd click add a feature. You get this box over here, and you'd select area of interest polygon. And then you're going to get this pop-up that says click in the map to start drawing. So every time you click, you're going to make a line, and when you double click, it's done. And in this case, I ended up with something that looks like this. So I drew what I call a drainage ditch. You can type in what it is to describe it, and there'll be a drop down here that it's only going to say drainage area. And then you click add. And then there'll be a button that pops, and you can do this as many times as you want. If you've got multiple quarter sections you're submitting, you can put all of your ditches in there, and at the end you just got to click save, and then it'll think for a while, and then it'll say that it's been uploaded. And then right under the map, there's going to be this section here. For majority of time, I'm expecting that it'll be private land, but say you're on leased land, then you'd select public, and then we'd be looking just to know that you have your authorization with rangelands or public lands. Indigenous consultation required. I'm going to suggest that most drainage projects do end up being a no, but in the event there's a yes, there is consultation guidelines available that are linked kind of on that first page, on that landing page that I was talking about. Do you have consent to release to affected lands or works? So that's that piece Marlon was talking about. If you're going into a county ditch, having that county permission, or going into an irrigation district or onto a neighbor. Method of drainage. So there's multiple things you can click. So ditching, pumping, tile drainage, rural drainage, other, and drainage area is something that is calculated directly from your shapefile, or if you know it, you can just from that drawing, or you can manually put it in. And you talk about whether it has an adequate outlet or not. So if it's going into a place that has capacity to handle it, or if it's going elsewhere. So moving on, so there's an impacted water body type. I'd suggest the majority of these you should be indicating overland drainage or runoff. So I know if there's pooled water, you might want to say that it's a lake or something like that. But if you answer lake, you're going to get a lot of confusing questions. If it's a wetland, obviously pick wetland, and you'll be directed to submit a wetland disturbance application as well. But generally, for most drainage projects, we're talking about this overland drainage runoff button. Impacted water body names, generally you can just say runoff or low spot or what have you. And then you'll put what land use classifications you're looking at, agricultural, or if we're talking in the town, we could do urban. New outfall structures required. That's generally only if there's like a constructed outfall to a natural water body that's required as part of the project. And basically, if you click if that is something that's required, we have a code of practice for that, and it'll direct you to the code of practice. And then, are you discharging into a terminal water body, so something that has no outlet? And then at the very bottom, there'll be a button that says Save as Draft, and that's where you get your application number. So as soon as you click Save as Draft, then you don't have a whole lot of concerns anymore. You're going to get an application number, and then everything you do will be saved from that point forward. So then we get into draft. So we have DAP. You'll get your application number, and you'll see that your title is there. You see submit application will be up there, but there's a few things that need to happen before you can do that button. On the tab below that, you're going to see this little bar. So in detail is where all the stuff that you've already done is going to be. And then there's this actions to do button tab, and that's a tab that's required to be filled out. Not all that clear that you have to do that, but in there's some stuff that we want you to upload. All right, so this in there you'll get this to-do list. So it'll vary depending on what type of application you're having. In this case, where I was looking at a very specific drainage project. So I said that I have consent from a landowner, so it's going to ask me to attach that consent. There's the submit the ditch construction plan requirement. So that's kind of what Marlon was talking about with regards to a plan for the drainage. And then there's a spot here for anything additional you might want to provide to us, whether there's pictures, whether there's more plans, you can do that. So if you click on the to do, it'll open it up a little bit, and then there'll be a place where you can drag and drop files directly from your computer, or you can click the attachment button, and it'll take you to the Windows Explorer to search for the attachment on your computer. And then once you have it attached, you'll see that you can name it or what have you. So it'll show that it's in the attachments, and then you can on the right side there'll be some little dots. You just click on the dots, and then it'll put a check mark there, so you know that it's done. Now to finish making your application, you have to go back to the detail tab. Scroll all the way to the bottom, and there'll be a little box regarding a disclaimer. And then there's the application, and then you'll have to agree to an application and disclaimer. So basically saying that all the information you've submitted is true to your knowledge, and talks about a little bit of the privacy side of things. So if you agree to it, click OK. If you click cancel, you won't be able to submit. But you click OK, you click save, and then you're able to submit your application. So at the very top, you can press the button, and it'll move from draft to completeness, and then it'll probably get bumped to technical review. And that's kind of the walkthrough of a full drainage application from beginning to end. The wetland one is very similar, but it asks for a little bit different information. So when it'll have a table of the wetlands that you're affecting, and you'll have to say how many hectares of those wetlands you're affecting, and you'll be prompted to upload things like your wetland assessment and impact form or wetland assessment and impact report. So going back to the main page, I just wanted to go to to talk about where you can view your applications or approvals. So at any time in Dirac, there's this Alberta logo in the top left. If you click that, it takes you back to this page with the 3 boxes. So if you click that from where we were, and then you go to My Dashboard, there'll be a section that has all the applications that you've made, and all the approvals or licenses that you have as well. So you can click on them and see some details, and you'll be able to see the authorizations you have, or if there's any information being requested on those authorizations. So everything that you submit is all going to be tracked through this page and viewable later on. And then DRAS support. So again, this is kind of the last slide, so showing all the support things. So Maddie account support there, DRAS support. We have an email address for them, plus the DRAS embedded help features, the get help and or the FAQ. Or you can call us directly if it's something that we might be able to help you with. Maybe it's something application specific. And again, the DRAS link that takes you to that landing page. And that's everything for me.
Thanks, Jason. I'll just pop my screen up here. Bear with me for a sec. Can you guys see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so my name is Logan Huscroft. I'm the compliance assurance lead based out of the Lethbridge office, and I'm just going to give you guys about a 10-minute spiel here on the workings of our compliance assurance program. So our quick agenda here is I'll go over our complaint and emergency response hotline. I'll give an overview of our compliance assurance program. I'll go over how we generally respond to an incident and some of the enforcement tools that are available to us. And I'll leave some time at the end for discussion if there's any questions. So the first step to get our compliance group out in the field is generally we receive public complaints. Public complaints of suspected non-compliance can be reported to the Energy and Environmental Response Hotline. This hotline is operational 24/7, and when you call in, the report will get assigned a unique identification number, which you will be provided, and then it will also create an incident which is assigned to an officer. And the number is provided here, and I believe this presentation is going to be recorded and saved, so that'll be available to you. So when we get a call, it'll get assigned to an officer, and it'll be dealt with roughly in the following manner. So I guess backing up a bit, just a quick overview of our compliance program. The department administers a variety of environmental and natural resource related legislation and programs. We have a comprehensive and integrated legislative framework that's been established, and the framework sets out environmental resource management protection and conservation obligations and requirements for all Albertans. Our regulatory framework is a fundamental component of achieving this goal, and as such, we developed and implement a compliance assurance program to ensure that there is compliance with the regulatory framework. Our compliance assurance program and approach is based on three main components. Our first component is education. It's a huge part of my job, being out in the field and talking to people and trying to raise awareness of environmental protection and management, regulatory requirements, and how best to comply with those requirements. We also educate on the consequences of non-compliance, and education is used by the department to encourage continuous improvement and environmental stewardship. Our second component is prevention, which is supporting compliance by building capacity and the willingness within the regulated community to comply with regulatory requirements, and identifies and addresses potential problems before they can cause environmental damage. We consider prevention to be a shared responsibility. It includes the actions of the department, other regulatory agencies, the regulated community, as well as the public. Failing those first two sections, we do have enforcement tools available to us as a regulatory backstop. The enforcement component ensures that there are consequences for non-compliance, ensures that parties do not benefit economically from non-compliance, and that responsibility to address damages is clearly assigned. Enforcement can include actions that remedy, deter, and punish where appropriate. So when we get a call, we'll initiate a response and generally do a review of the enforcement tools we have available and see if they are necessary to utilize any. So our initial response, generally, we would utilize several things, but including a combination of reviewing aerial photography, topographic mapping. We can also come out and do inspections as well as investigations to follow up on all reported instances of noncompliance. Where noncompliance is identified, all of the circumstances of the contravention are evaluated to determine if the responsible party was duly diligent in their efforts to comply. If we find that companies or individuals did not take reasonable measures to prevent contraventions, enforcement actions may result. And some of the enforcement tools that we have available to us to respond to identified noncompliance, kind of starting at the lower end of the scale, we can issue warning letters. We can move up into administrative penalties for a punitive option. We can also use enforcement orders and water management orders to remedy noncompliance that is present on the landscape. And then we have as an option as well a prosecution under the Water Act. And then another regulatory option for us is if a responsible party does hold authorizations, the department can look at potential suspension or cancellation of those regulatory authorizations. And that is it for my presentation. Again, this will, I believe, be saved and go out, and we have the contact information of all the presenters today provided here.
Perfect.
So, sorry, Todd. Yeah, it's Marlon again, and didn't mean to cut you off there. Apologize. But yeah, it just want to open it up for questions of any of us, or maybe some people have some questions of the county as well, or maybe you have some questions for us as well. So we're open.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you guys so much for doing this. It's amazing how much information is out there that a person may not be aware of, I guess. So I unmuted anybody that I had muted. So if you guys do have questions, feel free to unmute and go ahead. I have maybe one question that came to mind when we're just through the presentations. I just wondered, a lot of the onus is on the landowners to go through the process to get approvals for maybe altering a wetland or draining a wetland. Is there any information that's gone out to contractors, be it for above ground infrastructure or tile drainage, that would alert them to maybe tell the landowner that they have to go through this process? And I don't know which one of you would be best to answer that. But.
Well, I won't speak for Julian, but Julian, if you are aware of any educational pieces that have been done for the consulting or professional community or the contracting community out there, then let us know. But I will say this, and this isn't just about wetlands or drainage. It's really about any activity that may require an authorization under the Water Act or any other act and any other regulatory body. If you're a landowner out there and you're considering doing something and you really just don't know if anything is required, phone us. Like we would really rather work with proponents before they during their planning process, before they make any investment in either time or financially into a project, so that they can become fully aware of what may or may not be required, and then they can incorporate costs in financial costs or costs of their time into the project before making a decision on the project. So I think it's really important that people know and realize that we are a resource that they can use to help inform them and to allow them to make the best decision possible regarding any type of a project. Now, granted, we're specific to the Water Act, but I would think that would be the same for most regulatory bodies. I guess the other thing that I really want to point out in the planning process is the time factor. So I want people to understand that even if they've spoken with us and we've advised them what's required, they've got all the stuff together, they've submitted their application package on DRAS, you know, there is a processing time, and there are already many approval applications that have been submitted prior to theirs. And so I just want people to realize that proper planning means not submitting an application after harvest and expecting it to be done before freeze up, because that isn't likely to happen. You know, if you're planning a year out, I think that's probably appropriate. If you're planning on submitting an application and getting your authority to do the work in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, it probably isn't going to happen. I guess I just want to make sure people kind of think about that a little bit. You know, there may be dozens or over 100 applications waiting to be processed on the day that they submit their application. So it does take some time to get through that. We typically try to process applications in the order that they are submitted, but there's a little sub-component to that. If an application is not complete, if an application package is still requiring something, people are identified of the deficiencies in a supplemental information request or something like that, they have the opportunity to bring their application package to a true level of completeness, and then it can be processed to a decision stage. But until the application is complete, it won't go to the decision stage. So that's why I think it's really important that as part of the planning process, you know, we have that opportunity to speak with the proponent, let them know what is required, so that they can prepare their application package ahead of time. And again, just please be mindful of the timelines. Please incorporate a reasonable amount of time into your planning process.
I think I can expand a little bit on Marlon's answer to there about your question, Todd. You had asked if there's information that goes out to contractors for constructing infrastructure, tile drainage projects. While I'm not currently aware of anything proactively being done, at least on the compliance side, we do that basically on a case-by-case basis as we go out to files. For example, if a landowner wants a tile drainage project installed and hires a contractor to do it, if the contractor is actually physically doing the work, we would consider them to be a person responsible for that activity as well. So yeah, if we go out to a site and a contractor's there doing the work, we would do the same education presentation with them as we would for the actual owner of the project, especially if it's the business they're in, right? They need to know, and we do it, I would say, for sure reactively at this point anyway. But I think, yeah, we would definitely like to move to a world where we do some more of that stuff proactively. It's a great question and it's a good point.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, that's it's one thing that's always struck me that I just thought with a relatively small, pardon me, relatively small amount of those contractors, it's a relatively easy win, I guess. If there's no other questions, I have maybe one more. One of the comments that maybe we hear a little bit more on the municipal side is, and it probably because we're in irrigation country here, but you know, if I didn't have irrigation, there wouldn't be water holding there. So, you know, in that scenario, the landowner maybe feels compelled that water isn't a wetland. Is that a true statement or a maybe true statement?
Yeah, I guess I'll take that one. That is a maybe true statement, right? Because you're constantly irrigating, you might be creating circumstances where there's a little bit more water, but the likelihood is that the reason why the water is pooling there is because it's a depression, and you might be increasing the presence of the water for a more prolonged portion of the year, but there probably was at some point water that pooled within that location. So it would be challenging to know without doing a historical review of the site to determine what was there prior to the irrigation of the site. But you can look at adjacent lands that don't have irrigation and of similar composition and get an idea of what is there versus what you have. And like I said, lots of the wetlands that are on the site don't look like people don't really necessarily consider them to be wetlands because they're able to farm through them, and those areas they probably would have been able to farm through without irrigation. So I think that it is possible, but it isn't, I don't think, always the case.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
Nathaniel Berg with Leduc County. I have a question. We don't have the irrigation systems up here, but if we're fairly certain a ratepayer doesn't have a drainage approval, I'm thinking there's a backhoe in a creek and they're scooping it all up, and then my understanding then it's still the best practice for us as a municipality to phone that non-compliance hotline. Is that correct? Probably to Logan or Marlon?
Yeah, I would say that's correct, Nathaniel. If you see suspected non-compliance, that hotline is the quickest way to get in touch with an officer. Like I said, it's manned 24/7, and then we also have in each region across the province, there's always at least one officer on call 24/7, so that will get forwarded immediately. Middle of the night, whatever, somebody will get electrocuted in bed and will be available to respond to it. So the hotline for sure, I encourage people to use it if you see something. Have one of those see something, say something policies.
Perfect. Thank you.
And we talked a little bit about this, I think, but there's some retroactive things too, right? So if we note or somebody notes and calls the that 24/7 line, you know, that there was some ditching done or there was some tile put in, those kinds of things. That's a retroactive thing where the officer or inspector would come out, right, Logan?
Yeah, like even after things are done, if you just suspect there's a tile drainage program or tile drainage project in the ground, you don't believe it has an authorization for sure, you can report it, and yeah, we can follow up on stuff even if it's not actively occurring at that time.
Interesting. Okay. Well, is there any other questions from the group? Well, if not, publicly like to thank all you guys for making a presentation today. I really appreciate it. I really learned a lot, and I'm excited to push this out for anybody that wasn't able to attend today. Thanks for everybody that was able to.